Hi everyone, welcome back to another lecture video. Today we are going to focus on exchange in the Indian Ocean and then revisit the trans-Saharan trade. So let's get at it. So the main objective over looking at these trade routes is to actually explain the causes of growth in these networks and of exchange after 1200 to 1450. So some of the historical developments that we are going to look at today in Indian Ocean exchange and also the trans-Saharan trade routes is basically this improved transportation technologies and commercial practices that led to the increased volume of trade and expansion. The one that we are looking at in this one is the Indian Ocean Trade Network and how states around this region actually grew. And through this growth, you see interregional trade in luxury goods, which encouraged significant innovations in previously existing transportation and commercial technologies that include the compass, the astrolabe, and actually larger ship designs. Another historical development that we will look at is actually a growth of these desperate communities that were introduced, that did introduce their own culture and traditions into the indigenous cultures of the area. So some of the ones that we will look at and talk about are Arab and Persian communities in East Africa, Chinese merchant communities in Southeast Asia, and then the Malay communities in the Indian Ocean basin. All right, so, and then we'll also talk about the Ming Admiral Jing Hao. And this was interregional contacts increasing conflicts between states and empires over the struggle. And this is when we see this technological advancements and cultural transfers begin to happen in the area. And one of the main reasons that all of this was made possible is because of these monsoon winds. Long distance trade routes would depend on environmental knowledge. And so these monsoon winds were actually able to carry sailboats, further and farther and faster. All right, so I'm not going to play this video because it's a little bit long, but I highly encourage you to watch the Indian Ocean trade video because it has a lot of great information in it that you probably will see again and potentially need to use on your test. So let's talk about the Indian Ocean trade routes. It's basically the sea version to the Silk Roads. Until the discovery of the New World, it was the largest sea-based system of communication and exchange. And it stretched from southern China into eastern Africa. It was a much cheaper way to transport goods because cargo ships could carry a lot more than camel caravans. And they traded goods for a mass market rather than just luxury items that were what was set up on the Silk Road. And because of this, you had this increased cargo capacity of boats. You could actually sell more in these mass markets than just luxury items. So you have monsoon winds that we talked about earlier. In the summer months, it would go from northeast, and then in the winter months, it would go southwest. And this became a major player in making trade on the Indian Ocean reliable. And because of this, there was better technology in shipbuilding and oceanic navigation that drew on the achievements of the Chinese, the Malays, Indians, Arabs, and Swahilis. And they didn't deal in trading countries, more like a network of urban centers that were just strung out around the Indian Ocean. So there were no dominant trading countries. Everybody got to take part in this particular trade because city centers became the main source of the trade during this time. So then you see here again, monsoon winds, northwest and northeast, right? The winds blew so reliably that these monsoon winds could actually, move larger and better ships across the water with so much ease. So much ease. This improved transportation network technologies, or rather, improved transportation technologies and commercial practices led to an increased volume of trade, and it shortened the globe, meaning that the geographical range of trade routes, including the Indian Ocean, promoted a growth of powerful new trading cities. When we watched the video of the Srivijaya, this is one of the reasons why they were able to grow in such prominence. So, what technology facilitated this? Well, as the commerce increased, mariners learned about the monsoon winds, so they developed better sails. New ships like the Chinese junks and the Indian Arab dhows would make it possible to bring more stuff back a little bit safer. Just made it better all the way around. These new means of calculating latitude, using the astrolabe, meant that they could go farther, and they could, not just hug the shoreline of a country, they could venture out into the open waters. And this astrolabe actually would be used with a magnetic needle or a compass, and this would evolve and get better as time went on. Here you can see a version of a Chinese compass, right? Pretty stinking cool. So sailing and this form of trading actually needed these three items here to be able to facilitate the growth and expansion, that shrinking globe. No longer were any of these countries cut off from one another. They could fill up a boat and set sail. And one of the things that made this possible were these lateen sails. This is a thicker material to hold up against the strong winds. And it became the favorite sail during the Age of Discovery, mainly because it allowed a boat to tack against the wind. It was very much commonly used in the Mediterranean, in the Upper Nile River, and the northwestern parts of the Indian Ocean. This is where it was standard practice on the dhows. So let me show you a little video about
the lateen sail. Boat sails may be of two types. The oldest type is known as the square sail, which always has the same side facing the wind. Therefore, it is appropriate for large vessels sailing with a previously established course. The other type was developed much more recently, known as the fore and aft sail. The first fore and aft sail was the lateen sail. Triangular in shape, either side can face the wind, and therefore it is much more effective when sailing upwind. The origin of the lateen sail is unknown. It was probably introduced by the Arabs on the Mediterranean, where it is quite widespread, but no one knows whether it was originally designed by the Arabs or the Polynesians. This sail is most often used on vessels carrying cargo and passengers, or on fishing vessels that sail near the coast or in enclosed areas, lakes and lagoons. They were also used by pirates and corsairs in their raids. On the Albufera Lake, the albuferenques are single-masted vessels with triangular lateen sails. They were used for fishing and for transporting products or people across the lake. In recent years, several Latin sailing associations have emerged in Catarroja, Silla, and El Palmar, which have helped bring back this type of sailing that had virtually disappeared from the lake when internal combustion engines were added to the fishing boats.
You also saw the emergence of new ships. So you have the Arab Indian dhow, and then you have the Chinese junk. So these ships were made for sailing in the Indian Ocean, not for long distances, whereas these were made with large and flat bottoms that could carry lots of tribute gifts and cargo to China. So we also looked at pictures of that the Chinese junk was huge compared to the sailboats that were used by the Europeans to get to the Americas. So what is an astrolabe? So if you didn't know this, an astrolabe is just an inclometer. Basically, what this means is that it's used to determine the latitude of the ship at the sea by measuring the sun's noon altitude, or the meridian altitude of a star. So in order to use this device, the navigator would hold the instrument by the ring at the top, as you see in the picture, and this calls the instrument to remain in a vertical manner, right? Vertical. And then the person would align it, the plane of the astrolabe, to the direction of the object of interest. And this would allow them to determine the altitude by using a degree scale. So when you're looking at a map or you get coordinates, you see this in degrees. And if observing a dim object like a star, the navigator would observe the object directly through the aldeid. And if it was observing through the sun, then it was safer
Hi,
and
my
easier
name's
to allow
William
the
Greenwood.
shadow
I'm the
to
Al-Bukhari
cast
Foundation Curator of the
onto
Islamic World at the
the
British Museum,
aldeid.
and welcome to my corner. So, part of my job is working on the new Al-Bukhari Foundation Galleries of the Islamic World, which will be opening in 2018. And one of the displays, or re-displays in fact, will be of our collection of Islamic scientific instruments, particularly those involved with reading the skies, so things to do with astronomy and things to do with astrology. The best description, or the best explanation for astronomy and astrology, the difference therein, is that astronomy is telescopes and astrology is horoscopes. So astronomy is actually looking at the skies, trying to understand celestial phenomena, stars, planets, so on and so forth. Astrology is what those stars and planets and phenomena are supposed to do to us on Earth. Today, astrology is seen as somewhat less scientific. It's something that you see at the back of a newspaper generally. But for the very, very, very longest time, from very earliest times up until really very recently, astrology was seen as much of, maybe even more of a science than astronomy. Astronomy was there to serve astrology rather than the other way around. There are a number of different objects that you can use to find out about the sky, and the most important one, and the most long-lived one perhaps, is the astrolabe. So, if you imagine it, this is the universe in the palm of your hand, or at least the universe that you can see and comprehend. This is you, right here. This is the horizon, this is directly above you, and this is out of sight because it's below the horizon. Each of these pointers is for a particular star. And so with this, you have a whole map of the heavens right in the palm of your hand. It's used for all kinds of things, or it was used for all kinds of things before the invention of workable clocks. In the 10th century, one astronomer worked out that there were about 1,000 applications for one of these, ranging from the religious, so you can find the prayer times, or indeed the direction of Mecca, which is incumbent on Muslims. For prayer, you could tell the times for example, crops to be planted, for taxes to be raised, rising and falling of tides, all kinds of things. So this is your basic instrument, as it were. Let me go through this very, very slowly. How does this work? Well, I think the first thing to do is to explain all the different parts of it, because each of them has a very important aspect to it. So, to begin with, this is the ring, this is the halqa, which is connected to the kursi, which in European terms is called throne in English. So, why is there a ring on top? Well, this is to hang it from, so that you have it even, and you can hang it at eye level, so it's always flat. So this is always at eye level. It shouldn't be swinging about. If you hold it in your hand, you're not necessarily holding it flat. This bit around the edge, this is this is the mother, or the mater in Latin, and this holds everything together, and it has information, so it has the zodiac on the outside, it has zodiacs, it has times, it has days, it has all kinds of information. Inside, there are plates, and they're held inside the mother. So you can have sometimes up to about 5. They're often engraved on both sides. So depending on how far north or south you are, you'd use a different plate. So you'd have maybe one for Mecca, you'd have maybe one for Cairo, you'd have maybe one for Cordoba. And you can change them. On the front here, this bit with the star pointers, this is known in Latin as the reti, which is the net, but in Arabic it's the ankabut, which means the spider. And this is your map of the stars. Each one of these points to a different star. And all of this is held in suspension by this. This is the pin, the faras. And then finally, on the back, you have the alidada. So this is the ruler. This is what you use to sight with. Now, you have to be quite the expert to know how it works exactly, but I can give you a generally good idea. So, what you want to do first, if you want to tell the time, is you need to use this. This is the alidada. You have to imagine that this is hanging straight. I won't hold it too much like that. And you would line this up with the sun. As such, imagine the sun is over there somewhere. Obviously, you wouldn't look through it to sight the sun because you'd go blind. Everyone knows that's a bad idea. But you put your palm there and you'd make sure that the sun was shining directly through it. And then this would point you to a particular date, a particular time. You'd actually use the zodiac to tell you what day or time it is. And then you would use the front and you would bring it to the same as that, and it'll tell you all kinds of things. It'll tell you where stars are at that time. It'll tell you what you should be seeing in the sky. You can also do it in reverse. You can use a star if you know where it is on the pointer, and then you can line the alidada up with that, and it will tell you the same information but backwards. So that's a very, very rough idea of how it works. I hope that makes.
All right, so now that we know how to use an astrolabe, I love that video. Love it. Anyway, so the Indian Ocean trade saw different regions being opened up to products being exchanged. So from the Mediterranean basin, you saw ceramics and glassware, as well as wine, gold, and olive oil. We know what came from East Africa: the ivory, gold, iron goods, slaves, tortoise shells, so on and so forth. Arabia was frankincense and myrrh and other perfumes, carpets. India was again grain, precious stones, spices. Southeast Asia was tin, sandalwood, cloves, nutmeg, and in China, of course, was silk, porcelain, and tea. So this map actually shows the spread of rice, and it is suspected that the Indian Ocean and the Silk Road networks were the reason why rice was spread throughout the region. The dark orange colors actually indicate the origins of rice, and the green colors indicate where it was cultivated due to exchange and trade. Very interesting. So this map shows the spread of cotton. So the dark purple here is actually suspected where it was probably domesticated. And then you see the area of trade, because there are two different types of cotton plants. So you have the one that is originated here in Asia, and then you have another form of it that is cultivated and domesticated in parts of Africa in the Middle East, but you do see some overlap here as well. So, the different states that really facilitated trade were the Tang and Song dynasties, because they revived the tea trade after the collapse of the Han dynasty. You also saw that it provided unity and structure to support trade. China's population actually shifted southward due to these port cities becoming used more and more through the Indian Ocean trade. You actually saw Chinese inventions like those larger ships and the magnetic compass actually facilitate the trade. And then you also saw the importance of that Grand Canal that we learned about starting to increase. So then you have the Ming admiral, Zheng Hao, and China actually undertook the largest and most impressive maritime expeditions the world had ever seen. Since the 11th century, Chinese soldiers had been a major presence in South China Sea and also Southeast Asia. There was an enormous fleet that was commissioned by Ming Emperor Yang Li, and it was launched in 1405. And there would be 6 expeditions in 28 years. The first voyage was 300 ships. It was captained by a Muslim eunuch named Zhong Hao. Sorry, I was reading. Anyway, he wanted to enroll distant peoples and states into this Chinese tributary system. So there were dozens of rulers that accompanied the fleets in China, or back to China, and they would present tribute to the emperor. They would perform the submission rituals that we talked about, the Kowtow, and then they would also receive gifts in return from China. And he did this because he wanted to bring the world together. And I highly suggest clicking on the link there because you learn a lot more about his expeditions. On his 4th expedition, he actually brought a giraffe back from China as a tribute gift to the emperor. And he kept many exotic animals that were given through the tributary system around the Indian Ocean in a special garden at his palace. Of all the animals, the giraffe was the one that the emperor asked his artists to paint. So this is a map of Zhang Hao's expeditions throughout the Indian Ocean. All right, so something to think about as we go into our discussion during next class is, how do you think Zhang Hao's voyages in the tribute system utilized by the Chinese encourage significant technological cultural transfers? Then let's look at the Islamic State. Islam was very friendly to merchants, unlike Confucianism, and they promoted a commercial life. So Muslim merchants actually intensified commercial activity in the region. Middle Eastern gold and silver flowed into the southern India to purchase, all sorts of different products like pepper and pearls. Muslim merchants, as well as Jewish and Christian merchants, would establish communities of traders, and this would be known as the diasporic communities, and they would be in East Africa all the way into South China coast. And it actually, unfortunately, increased the use of slaves, specifically in the production of sugar and dates, all of which were being exported. There would be a 15-year slave revolt that disrupted the Abbasid Empire before it would be crushed. And these are just some images. So let's look at the Srivijaya in the Indian Ocean. They would come to power when Malay sailors opened an all-sea route between China and India through the straits of the islands. There would be many small ports along the Malay Peninsula and coast of Sumatra, and that began to compete and attract traders and travelers. The Srivijaya would dominate the choke point of the Indian Ocean, and they levied taxes on ships that passed through. So this is how they made their money, and it's also how they began to control the spice network in Southeast Asia, as we learned from the video. So these Southeastern Asian rulers and elites actually found themselves attractive to the Indian belief that leaders were god kings and perhaps reincarnations of the Buddha or the Hindu deity of Shiva. The Srivijaya monarchs employed Indians as their advisors, and basically the higher ups in office. And they imported political ideas and Buddhist religious concepts, which provided a higher level of magic and mysticism. Srivijaya became major Buddhist center, attracting thousands and thousands of monks. As we learned in the video, they actually built this incredible Buddhist temple with many different statues that as you went up it, you prayed to each of them. You also have the Borobudur, and they built the Selendindra kingdom that is in central Java. And they were closely allied with the Srivijaya. They built Hindu and Buddhist temples. The Borobudur being the most famous of them. It's a mountain-shaped structure that has 10 levels that we saw. And then you also see what's called syncretism that was carved into these statues of these Javanese features. And these would be scenes that were set in Java, not in India, because it resonated with mountain worship in the Southeast Asia region. And Shiva was also worshipped, and cows were also honored here. All right, now we have the Swahili city-states, and they emerged in the 8th century. They stretched from present-day Somalia to Mozambique in Africa, the eastern coast of Africa. Early ancestors were farmers who spoke Bantu because this was where Bantu migrations happened, if you remember from your African map activity. You would see a rise of Islam stimulated their trade in the Indian Ocean. They would sell those exotic luxury goods like leopard skins, quartz, and ivory into the markets of Arabia, Persia, India, and beyond. The African merchant class greatly developed during this time. Major cities were formed and became great urban centers, and each city was governed by their own king, very similar to these Greek city-states. This bronze lion was actually found in the Swahili city of Senja, and the dates of it are around 1100. And it shows synchronism because it's an African lion in the Indian artistic style that was made from melted Chinese copper coins. So synchronism in Swahili, the Swahili city-states, Swahili grammatically is African with Bantu roots, but when it's written down, you see Arabic script with Arabic loan words. So many ruling families claimed Arab or Persian origins. And the Arab and Indian merchants also settled in this coast area, became blended into the community and with many of these families. So they became rapidly Islamic and actually were introduced by Arab traders. So you can see here, move this over, you can see here that the language is very similar to that of Arabic. Dun, dun, dun. So the Islamic rim of Africa actually looks like this. You have majority Muslims, you have sparsely located or sparsely populated because of the Saharan desert. Then you have this area of religious conflict, which we still see in the world today. And then you see where Christianity reigns supreme. But if you notice that the Islamic Swahili city-states, this is where you would see these desperate Muslim communities that would be established along the Indian Ocean trade network. Just some pictures of some ancient mosques. You have the Great Zimbabwe that was centers of the gold trade and also ivory. They became one of the most powerful and wealthy for serving as the middleman between the interior of Africa and the Swahili city-states. Their wealth embodied in large herds of cattle, and they peaked around 1250 to 1350. And they were known for their large stone enclosures built without any mortar. So the key places along these important routes were merchant set up desperate communities where they introduced their own culture, traditions into the indigenous culture. So you have the Muslim merchant communities in the Indian Ocean as well as the Chinese merchant communities in Southeast Asia. And this is just explaining a little bit more what these diaspora communities actually were and what they actually look like. And then obviously you have the increase of